What's up? What's up? It's been a long time since I've live streamed, but wanting to get back into it. Um, I feel bad today. I don't even have my headphones with the microphone on it, so probably gonna not be too great of audio quality. I'm gonna try and get my nice microphone in here in my office. See if that will work out. Yeah, so I want to get back into live streaming. I haven't done it in a while, and I miss it a lot. And I don't really have anything like super particular, but I was like, oh, I want to live stream about that today. But I just want to like let you guys in on a little bit of the stuff that I'm working on for React Table. React Table is, in fact, I'll just show you React Table here. Clear up some stuff. Go. All right. So React Table is this library that I built a couple years ago. It used to be like a component that would help you render like these big tables and data grids. But just recently, I decided to kind of do some really big changes to it in version 7 and make it hook-based and headless. And if you don't know what headless means, then Headless UI, I hate sending you to a Medium article, but there's this great article called Headless User Interface Components by Merrick Christensen. This is a great article that kind of gives you the basic concepts of like what it means to have headless UI. So I definitely recommend reading that if you don't know what headless UI is. But in a nutshell, if you come down here to concepts of React Table, a headless utility means it doesn't render or supply any actual UI elements. You're in charge of utilizing the state and callbacks of the hooks provided to render your own markup. There's a link there to that article right there. But what this does is, first thing it does is it keeps my library, React Table, out of your way for what your UI looks like. So many issues come from like libraries rendering markup a certain way and then giving you 1,000 options to hook in and customize them. And I think that's how the old React Table worked, where there was like a prop to customize every single thing inside the table. But that's not how this works now. Basically React Table version 7 is just handling all the logic and all the utilities and giving you like a nice way to wire those utilities into your UI. So it's very different from the last version, but it's really fun though. I'm going to show you some of these examples I have. Let's see. There's a ton of examples here. Like this is the basic example. You can see the source inside of the React Table repo. The sources are, they're really simple, like create React app. There's some rescript stuff in there, but it works just fine in like Code Sandbox. And then you can also open that in Code Sandbox right here. So this is a basic table. And I made these as basic as possible on purpose. Like, I know the last React table, was super fancy looking out of the box, and a lot of beginners and people who are learning React loved that. But at the end of the day, like I wanted to build, I want to build like really valuable enterprise tools that are extremely flexible, and so you could technically get to that place again if you wanted to, build this fancy UI with all these styles and use React Table version 7 to wire it all up. But this one is really simple. Like I'm actually using table markup, like th, 2d. So you can actually see, like here's the base of our app right here. I create some columns, and you got to remember we're using hooks. If you're not familiar with React hooks, I would suggest that you get familiar with them. I wouldn't say they're like a new thing or like a, I don't know, like a trend. Like they're where React is going and where it already is really for me. But we create some columns here with use memo. That means just this object will only get created once basically because there's no dependencies right here. And then we take those columns and send them through to our table component that we created. And we also send through some data. I just have like this random data maker right here. So I make 20 rows of data. Also memorize. So this data will only get created one time, even though it's in the render function. And then right here, the table component right here that we're using, this doesn't come from React table itself. This is our own table component that we built. So if you look at this table component, let's see, let's jump up here to table. So this is our own table component that we built. And we built it using React Table version 7 hooks. So there's one main hook right here called use table. And you import that from React Table like this. Oh, I totally forgot. I'm going to make this a little bigger for you guys. I'll close that too. Yeah, so you import use table from React Table, and you pass it some options. Right now, we're just taking in the columns and the data that we passed our table component, and we're passing that directly into use table. And then use table gives us back some things that we can use to build our UI. So the first one is called get table props, and that is a prop getter. A prop getter is just a function that returns props that you can spread onto a component. It's a concept made very familiar by libraries like Downshift. Pretty much anything that Kent C. Dodds has built. It's a great pattern. So this get table props will return kind of an object of props that are required for the table. And honestly, there's not a lot going on under the hood here for this table thing. But this also provides an area for plugins to extend how the table works. So let's put that there first. And then we're going to make a header area. So just use thead. And then it gives us this header groups array, which a header group, if you can think of it like a header group is one row of headers. So this first name, last name, age, visit, status, profile. Like that's one header group, and then each header inside of that is a header. So we loop over the header groups and create a row for each header group. And then for every individual header, we make a th. So every individual header also comes, in fact, this might as well just be called header. Like, it doesn't need to be called column, I guess. But in essence, it is a column. So you take the column, and there's another prop getter right here. So on the row itself, you want to call the header group dot get header group props, and that's going to give the props that are needed for this header group. And then on the individual header, you call the get header props prop getter from the column object that it returns, and that's going to put the props on the actual header that need to be there. And then finally, you can call a renderer. So column.render means we want to render this renderer from the column from the column context. So if you look down here at our column structure, that first column right here has a header of first name. And so what's happening is when we call ColumnRenderHeader, we're rendering whatever's in this header value. And that could be first name. There could even not be a header at all. Like you'll see that there's nothing there. It could be a React component, actually, so we could pass a function. We could actually even pass, we could even use hooks in here if we wanted. We can use whatever we want. So we could return first name plus count ref count. we could say const count ref equals react use ref 0. And every single time this renders, we're going to increment it. So you can use state inside of any renders because they're rendered as components. It's pretty sweet. We'll just get rid of all that and go back to first name. First name. It can also be class components, which is really neat. So it's very flexible rendering. In fact, the utility under the hood that I wrote is called FlexRender. Basically, lets you pass any type of React friendly value or function or class, and it will render. What's also cool about this is it also receives some props. So if we console log out the props for that header, actually see, so the first name column right there, header, is getting some cool, like a cool list of props here. We get all of the table instance is automatically given to us. So we have columns and data, state, everything that you normally get up here, getting back from the use table. The entire table instance is available. We even have all of the rows, and let's see, the individual column is also passed, which is nice. So we have context into what column we're rendering. So you could make like a very generic header component and use, the column prop that's passed to it to render whatever it is. So let's see, the column prop has some really cool stuff in here, like the parent. If you have like this nested header group set up right here, I mean, all that's taken care of for you under the hood with React table, but you have access to that structure inside of there as well. So it's really cool. That becomes more useful when you get into things like rendering filters or rendering sort, sort toggles and stuff like that, which we can get into in another video. So once you've rendered the header, then we can start actually making the table body. So tBody, great, useful tag. And then we take the rows that were given to us from use table, and we are going to map over them and create a tr instead of a tBody for every single row. I'm only creating 20 rows right here, and I'm not using pagination. So rows is going to show every single row, like it's going to have every single row that we put in there. So if I were to come in here and like change this to 50, like it's going to render 50 rows. So you can see how once you start getting to higher numbers, you're going to want to look into pagination. Also something that you can do with React table, but I'll show you that in a different video. So let's go to 10 rows for now so we can see all of the rows. Right here, so every single row that we loop over, we need to do some processing for rows before we can technically display them on the table. And if we were to do that processing for every single row that we have for data, even though we weren't displaying it, your tables would probably get pretty slow. The same way that you paginate and virtualize, you kind of want to lazily process rows and prepare rows for display, so that we're not, looping over tens of thousands of rows, doing a bunch of work on each of them when we're really only going to be displaying a few of them. So the reason for that, so we have this this function returned from use table called PrepareRow, and it's there exactly for that purpose. So any row that we're going to display, we have to prepare the row first. And interestingly enough, if we were to take this away, you're going to get an error. And let's see if I can show you that error. Let's refresh. So row.getRowProps is not a function. Now that error is there because getRowProps is not assigned to the row until we call PrepareRow. So there's a lot of stuff under the hood that is lazily processed in React Table to keep it very performant. And this is one of those things. So every row that you're going to render, you just need to call PrepareRow and pass the row. React Table will handle the rest of it for you. Then we create so this is kind of just a handy little model here. If we wanted, we could create a function like this and call PrepareRow and then actually return this tr right here. You could do it this way too. I prefer the other way, like you just kind of use an OR operator right here. So it'll prepare the row, which returns nothing, and then it will actually go and process this. So, if you guys have any questions too, you guys can leave a question in my chat if you want, and I can answer some of them maybe as we go, or at least at the end of it I can help you guys understand how this works. So after you have called row.getRowProps on the row, every row comes with an array of cells attached to it. And you can map over those cells and get an individual cell object. And from there we can render our actual cell 2D. And just like everything else, cell has a .getCellProps prop getter right here that's going to attach useful props onto the actual cell, like keys, sizing, call span, nifty things like that. And exactly like we did with the header, we're going to call ColumnRender, except for this time we want to render in the context of a cell. So cell comes with a render method as well, and we're going to call cell render and then actually pass the type of renderer we want to use. Now if you look at our column structure down here, we don't have any cell renderers set up on our columns, and that's okay because React Table comes with built-in renderers for headers and cells. So headers, as you might have known from before, just render nothing. And that's the built-in renderer. But cells actually have a built-in renderer that will return the value. So in a way, there is a default cell renderer on every single column that looks like this. So it's a function, and it takes the cell prop that is passed to it. Since we're using cell.render, we have access to the cell data. We also have access to the column and the row data here as well. But what we want is the cell. And inside of the cell, we have a couple of things. Value is one of those, so we just return the value. This is the default renderer for every single column, unless you overwrite it. In fact, we could overwrite it if we wanted to by doing this. If we went up here and we created a default column object, and we could say value plus default. That will be our default cell renderer. So if we add that, you can see every single renderer now is giving us a value and then default. But we don't want to do that. So we'll get rid of the default column. But that comes in handy for a lot of other things as well. Default, extending the default column is very powerful. So after that, so we call cell.render.cell, and it's just rendering the value. So we have this table here. And really, for a basic table, that's all you need. There's no other code here. I'm not importing anything like custom or anything. Just make data, use table, and some styles. If I could take away all these styles right here, actually, you can see what it looks like. So it's still rendering like an HTML table, and that's why things are still fairly aligned and everything. It's not rendering like it's not rendering borders or anything like that, probably because of some default styles. So these are just some default styles that I added in here. But yeah, after you have created like your first table like this, you're probably going to be very familiar with Headless UI and how Headless UI works. And from there, you can start to do some really cool things. I'm going to close this example. So you can do things like sorting. There's a hook, a plug-in hook, as we call it, called use sort, and use sort by. And you can import that from React table and just pass it after your options to the use table hook, and then it lets us do some new cool things. So we just add some more prop getters here and there. There's really not a lot. It's basically this stuff right here that attaches some listeners onto the headers, and now we can sort. And it kind of just takes care of all of that for us under the hood. Nothing else really changes. You can do other things like filtering. I hope this example has refreshed the latest version. It wasn't working a few minutes ago. Code Sandbox was caching an older version of React table. It looks like it still is. So I'm just going to come in here and make sure it's using the right version. Yeah, so filtering is actually really fun too. I've created a couple of default filters here. So really quickly, all of these are their own videos in their own right, but you can create custom filter UIs really easily. So you can have a default filter UI, like just a text box, or for individual columns, you can actually define the filter UI. And exactly how you would render a header or a cell renderer, you can render the filter. So like the age column has a slider column filter component on it, and we're rendering that filter right here. And that slider component, if we come up here, slider column filter is really cool. It gives us the column that we're doing. We have the filter value. We can update the filter value. We even have access to the rows before they were filtered. So like if we were to filter down to only people who are 20 years old, you can see there's only 3,275 records that made it into this last name column. So you can actually do faceted filtering if you want. It's really, really easy. Yeah, and we can calculate mins and maxes and then just render the input and say, hey, you know what, when the input changes, we're going to update the filter value. As you can see up here, like when we drag that around, that age number up here updates. We can even set it to undefined and turn it off, have it removed. So filtering is very powerful, which basically just add a hook and you can customize to your heart's desire. There's also grouping and pagination. There's row selection, which is something that previously hasn't been built into React table, but now it's extremely easy to do. You can add row selection hook and render a column that has this little selection header and cell right here. And now you can select all of the rows, all of those individual ones. It's very nice. There's expanding for sub-rows. There's even subcomponents, which is funny. Subcomponents is funny because in the old React table, subcomponents was part of the API for the actual table component. But in React table version 7, since you're rendering your own table UI, you're in charge of rendering a subcomponent. So we actually made our own little API here, render row subcomponent. We pass our own function that just renders some stringified object values from the row. And then in our table renderer, what we did is we just said, hey, if this row is expanded, I want you to make another row underneath it, give it the call span that goes all the way across, and then call our render row subcomponent. So you can see if we expand that, we have a whole other row with just one cell, and we're rendering whatever we want inside there. And it's not necessarily that this isn't a React table feature in and of itself, but we now have the tools to build that feature very easily. Where we didn't have that before, we could build all sorts of different variations of React table subcomponents or whatever. Editable data is another one that hasn't been exactly easy to do in the past. And I wonder if this one has been updated to the most recent set of data. Or sorry, the most recent version of React table. It looks like it hasn't. But I know it was just working locally for me the other day. And that's totally fine. But basically you'd be able to, edit your data here, move around. Yeah, it looks like we're encountering a bug right here. Yeah, and that's okay. We're still fleshing out some of these examples as we're moving out of alpha and into kind of a beta state. Hoping to have beta out here in a couple of days. But yeah, editable cells are really easy. It's very simple to create your own renderer for an editable cell. What else can we do? There's a hook called use table state, which is really cool. Claudio Secchia says, "Will you please be this published at the end? Thank you so much." Yeah, this video will be published when I get done, so don't worry. This hook called use table state is really cool because it can actually hoist out the table state into your own component using a hook. And what that does is it lets you, first of all, it lets you set initial states for your table. It also lets you control states and override internal state regardless of what React table does. It has a state reducer pattern, also made very useful and common from Kent C. Dodds. State reducer pattern lets you kind of extend the rules and update patterns for state without writing your own state solution. And then finally, you can actually just, since you've got the state hoisted out and it's in a hook, you can listen to it using things like use effect or use layout effect. So you can actually watch the table state for changes and update things accordingly. It's really nice. In fact, that's actually what's happening here. This pagination example is kind of doing some fake server-side page data stuff. It's not real server-side data, but we kind of have our own little fake server. If you look right here, we have a fetch data function that could be any API. But anytime that the see right here, we hoist out the table state right here, and we take the page index and the page size and we put them into an effect, and we say, hey, when page index and page size change, we're going to call this fetch data function on our table component. And down here, that fetch data component just says, hey, go take the page size and the page index and go fetch me some pages. This could be from server-side data or just asynchronous data in general. So you can see as the page changes, we show a little loading bar down at the bottom, and the page is incrementing, but we could be fetching those rows from anywhere. So controlling really anything, not just pagination, but sorting and filtering and grouping, anything. You can control any state on the table that you want with that component, or with that hook. So haven't done any of these yet, but I want to show that it's so easy to build your own UI. I mean, you guys have seen already that you can build your UI however you want. So I was using styled components. You could just use plain CSS or Material UI or Bootstrap. And there's even people who still want to use divs, like the old React table. You can use divs and flexbox stuff if you want. Really, anything is possible. So React table, yeah, I'm really proud of it. I'm still working very hard on it. We use it a lot at Nozzle, where we do a lot of data visualization, and I just wanted to make sure that we had like a good table component. I'd like to thank these sponsors. Like, they have really made it possible. Like Retools, Appy, and Nozzle, and even these like supporters and fans down here. You guys don't understand how cool it is to have people support your open source work. So if you want to help me build React Table, but you don't necessarily know how to code, or maybe you just don't have time to contribute, or maybe your company uses React Table, you can become a patron. Counts, and there's I have $1 tiers and $5 tiers, and like, really, it's pretty flexible. So, and just making more YouTube videos. I'm really excited about streaming on YouTube some more. Anton E has a question. Hey Tanner, thank you for this excellent lib. What about fixed header while a table body is scrolled? Is it possible? Is one of those table features that clients ask? Absolutely, it is possible. Again, it's not something that is currently built in, like a hook that you just drop in, because that is a UI concern, right? But honestly, just like HTML fixed table header, freeze the top row for an HTML table only. Like, this is called fixed header scrolling. Your number of documented approaches. Let's see. So I'm sure there's a way to do it, like according to pure CSS scroll to easily fix overflow. So this is the thing, is if you can do it with CSS, if you can do it with JavaScript, then you can do it with React Table. Because it's not taking over your UI and you're in charge of rendering your own UI, you can render it however you want. You can find some library that does fixed headers. You could build your own. You could just use CSS. Heck, you could use the material. You could use the material design styles or the material UI components if you wanted, and just hook up the React table on top of it. Or you could use Bootstrap. So I know it's a different mentality, but you gotta start, thinking in that way. Like, oh, can you do this with React Table? Well, if it has to do with rendering or markup or styles, then the only question to ask is, can I do this at all? And if you can, then you can do it with React Table. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question, but yes, you can do that. Hopefully in the future, there's going to be a hook or some style or some guide that's just like, oh, hey, you want fixed headers? Here's one way that we know how to do it. But because it's a headless UI component, there's an unlimited amount of ways that you could do it. So, and I'm looking for help on that. Like, if you want to write an example on how to do it, and push a PR or a guide or something like that, or an example, that would be fantastic. Yeah, so I just reworked the documentation. You should go take a look at it. There's installation information, which is always pretty straightforward. These concepts are good to read through, but really looking at the API is extremely helpful. Kind of goes through all the hooks that are built in, how to use them, gives you a little bit of information of how React Table works under the hood. Using hooks is a little different than what you might be used to. There's some things that you have to like memoize with use memo and use callback and things like that you're passing to use table. And all of that's in here. Use table, it shows you there's table options, and then there's options for columns, and then it shows you all the things that are returned on the entire instance, on header groups and columns and rows, cells. And every single plugin hook, like use sort by, also shows you like, oh hey, here's the table options that this one supports, and here's the column options it gives you back on top of the old one. So very flexible, very cool. Anyways, I think I'm about out of time for today. Thanks for listening, you guys. Really excited about React Table. Going to be streaming a lot more about it, creating some tutorial videos, going through each of those examples and kind of explaining how to do it. But I appreciate your support and can't wait to see you again. So take it easy.